My name's Sarah Pearce, and I'm the relatively new chair of the Society. And today we're privileged to welcome Dr. Beatrice St Laurent. But before I introduce our speaker, I need to just explain a few technical things, even though we know the world of Zoom is very, very familiar for many, but we can't assume that it's familiar for everyone. So the video screen today has been turned on once you came into the Zoom meeting, but if you'd like to switch the video off, you just need to click on the video tab. We do encourage you, though, to let everyone have the benefit of seeing you, as it gives a more personal atmosphere to our lectures. All microphones have been switched to off now to reduce the background noise, and we ask you please to keep your microphone off unless you're invited to turn it on to ask a question at the end of the lecture. We will allow plenty of time for questions after the lecture, and if while the lecture is going on, or indeed afterwards, you have a question, please do so. Please ask your question via the chat function button, which you'll find in a row with the other buttons at the bottom of the screen, or at the side indeed. If during this presentation you press on this, a chat bar will appear and you can type in your question. You'll see I've already put an invitation into the chat to type your questions in. Once you've finished typing, press enter. And after the lecture, when we're in the question and answer session, I will either present the questions directly to our speaker, or I may call on you, the questioner, to ask the question yourself. Please note that this session is being recorded and it will be made available on our website, firstly to our members and then to the general public. And if you've missed any of our previous lectures, please do go to the website of the Society to access the recordings. Finally, I must emphasize that we are a charity. We rely on our membership fees and generous donations to continue our activities, including giving grants to students who are now beginning to go back to digs in Israel. And lastly, also to publish our peer-reviewed journal, Strata. As a member, you will help to fund our activities and you'll get a copy of the journal. So if you're here and you're not a member, we do urge you to join us by getting in contact with Sheila Ford, our administrator, whose email you already have. Before I go on to introduce our speaker, I'd like to pass over briefly to my colleague, Anthony Rabin, the Treasurer, to speak about our Jubilee appeal in this Jubilee year of the Society.
Sarah, thanks very much and good afternoon, everybody. As some of you will know, we've decided to launch a special appeal to mark our Diamond Jubilee year. The appeal will be targeted at a specific archaeological project in Israel, whose identity will be decided upon during the course of the appeal, which we will run for the next 12 months. And the funding is going to be used in three ways. Firstly, to provide a substantial grant or grants to one or more students or early career candidates to be associated with the project and gain on-the-ground archaeological experience. As many of you will know, we have historically provided 4 or 5 travel grants each year to students to go on a variety of digs in Israel, but this will be different. Firstly, the bursary, all bursaries, will cover not only travel, but also all living expenses while in Israel. Additionally, it'll be focused on one project rather than 4 or 5. Secondly, we'll be funding a teaching component to the dig so as to assist the project director and staff with structured learning for all the volunteers on the dig. And lastly, we'll be looking for ways to assist the project budget in funding the travel from time to time of a range of specialists who may benefit the project with their expert knowledge. Our chair and committee are busy structuring a campaign to run during the appeal, and we'll be updating members and the website as to progress, along with posting stills and videos of the projects that we've helped in the past. So please support this appeal generously through the link on the web page. Alternatively, do contact our administrator, Sheila Ford, whose email you all have if you'd like to contribute. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Anthony. So now to our lecturer, a very warm welcome to you on behalf of us all. Beatrice St Laurent wrote her PhD on Islamic art and architecture at Harvard University. Since 2013, she's been professor of art history at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts. Her activities are of great interest to many people working across the whole field of art history, archaeology, and to us in the Anglo-Israel Archaeological Society. And just to pick out a few recent examples, in 2016, she was Seymour Gittin Distinguished Professor at the Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in Jerusalem. And just earlier this year, she spoke on the kiln and tile remains of the Crusader Najara vaults on the Haram al-Sharif at the first International Academic Conference on New Studies in Temple Mount Research, which was hosted by the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. Beatrice's speciality is the Ottoman period, and for 30 years she's researched and collaborated on the Dome of the Rock and the Haram al-Sharif with Isam Awwad, former chief architect and conservator of the Haram al-Sharif until his passing in 2018. Dr. St Laurent has an extensive publication record in this area spanning nearly 30 years. Her latest book, authored jointly with Isam Awwad, Capitalizing Jerusalem, Muawiyah's Urban Vision 638 to 680, will be published in 2023. And two other books are in preparation: Condition Report on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the era of the British Mandate Government of Palestine and the restorations of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque of the 20th and 21st century. So it's my privilege to invite you to give your lecture, Beatrice, on the transformation of the Temple Mount in the early Umayyad period. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'll now share my screen and see that there's no technical glitches. Today's lecture is not intended to be a repetition of past scholarship, but rather discusses the situation of the sanctuary and its early monuments between 638 and 680, prior to the rule of Caliph Abd al-Malik, who reigned between 685 and 705, who has previously been given credit for the monuments I will discuss today. The conquest of Jerusalem took place between November 636 to April 637. Today, I will focus specifically on the architectural accomplishments of Muawiyah as governor after 638, and later as first Umayyad sovereign of Greater Syria or Balad al-Sham between 660 and 680. During this time, he transformed the Temple Mount into Bayt al-Maqdis in Arabic, derived from Bayt ha-Mikdash in Hebrew, meaning the temple, into a sanctuary sacred to the religions of the book under the sovereign Muslim rule of the Umayyads, and established Jerusalem as its capital. My research and publication on this topic began in 1990 with the Ottoman restorations of the Dome of the Rock, and continued over 30 years with my late colleague Isam Awwad, the former chief architect and conservator of the monuments of the Haram from 1974 to 2004. The results of our research, as already stated, will be published in our upcoming book coming out in 2023. I show you an image of Isam with Meir Ben Dov, the Israeli archaeologist who excavated the southern area of the south of the platform in the 1970s. This was in a meeting that we had with him in 2015. They've remained friends over the years. First, a preface to our new architectural evidence. Much previous scholarship relied on 10th century and later histories and hadith or prophetic traditions, which discarded earlier sources and discredited the accomplishments of Muawiyah, the first Umayyad ruler of Greater Syria, with whose religious and political views these later authors disagreed. These later texts attributed the Dome of the Rock and the site to the later Umayyad ruler Abd al-Malik, who codified Islamic rule by diminishing the egalitarian views of Muawiyah. Thus, primary sources prior to the 10th century then needed to be first reviewed, not through the lens of later politically driven texts, but rather in attempts to ascertain their original intent. Our research relies on early Arabic sources with a re-examination of period Christian and Jewish sources. We also utilized post-16th century Ottoman Turkish documents, more recent British reports of 1918 and 1946, and the Jordanian 1960s 4-volume unpublished report. The contextual analysis of all the sources contributed to a solid foundation for what existed on the site between 638 and 680. Also, Israeli archaeologists with whom Isam and I collaborated, notably Meir Ben Dov and Jerusalem archaeologists for the IAA, and scholars of medieval Christian sources who contacted me quite independently, contributed to our new view of the early 7th century. For the Christian medieval sources, notably, it was David Woods of University College Cork and Rodney Aist. Most importantly, my colleague, Palestinian architect Isam Awwad, shared his vast knowledge of the site for over 32 years. Thanks to Isam and other officials at the Haram, I've had the great privilege of free access to the site for over 30 years. So who was Muawiyah? He and his family converted to Islam in Arabia by 630. And after his role as scribe of the Prophet Muhammad in Arabia in these early years of Islam, Muawiyah arrived in Syria with the army of conquest in 634. He later became governor of Syria in 638, and in 661 became the Amir al-Mu'minin, or commander of the faithful, and not Caliph, in his mosque in Jerusalem. The faithful are the people of the book, the Ahl al-Kitab in Arabic, or Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and Sabians, as noted in the Quran. The early Umayyad royal Islamic monuments drew on the religious and royal precedents of the Jewish, Byzantine, Christian, Sasanian, Persian, Zoroastrian, and Arab pre-Islamic Sabian traditions for their inspiration in crafting a new imperial and religious message for the region. That message was one of unity of these religions under new sovereign Muslim Umayyad rule, which allowed access to the site for all religions and populations of the city and region. That said, I will demonstrate that Muawiyah re-sanctified the Temple Mount for the nascent religion of Islam, beginning with rebuilding the walls of the precinct, previously extant gates to the sanctuary, and adding multiple new ones. He built the first mosque of the city in the southeast corner of the sanctuary, which remains today, added at least 3 arcades leading from the interior of the sanctuary to 2 new monuments, the Dome of the Chain, and completed the construction of the Dome of the Rock up to at least the level of the dome of the building. He further built his own palace just outside the southeast corner of the precinct and created the foundations for the large administrative complex south of the precinct and west of his early palace, left incomplete at his death. He thus established Jerusalem as his capital by 660 with the creation of the monuments needed for the administration of the new Umayyad Empire. The completion of these architectural projects was left not to his son as successor, but to the Caliph Abd al-Malik from a different branch of the Umayyad family, who came to power in 685, 5 years after Muawiyah died, and he ruled until 705. There is strong textual and monumental evidence that Abd al-Malik followed in Muawiyah's path in completing or adding to his projects. This issue and that of the establishment of early Islamic statehood was addressed in my 2019 article in the Journal of Islamic Archaeology, entitled From Arabia to Bilad al-Sham, Muawiyah's Development of an Infrastructure and Monumental Architecture of Early Umayyad Statehood, but it does not deal with Jerusalem. The site and its monuments. Moving on. After the arrival of the Muslims, the first task was to reestablish the perimeter and the sanctity of the site by rebuilding the walls and many of the gates, and the western bridge providing access to the precinct. According to archaeological evidence, during the late Roman period after the 70 CE destruction of the Second Temple and the subsequent Christian period, there is little evidence of new construction on the site. In fact, there is more archaeological evidence demonstrating that the ruined temple precinct was a stone quarry for the many new late Roman and Byzantine Christian buildings outside the sanctuary. Good sources for the late Roman period are the publications of IAA archaeologist Shlomit Wexler-Badola, and for the Byzantine, those of Yana Chekanovitz. And these are cited in the book. Textual sources cited by Shlomo Goitin confirm that Muawiyah first rebuilt the walls of the precinct. Those renewed walls sit directly on Herodian wall remains, most notable in the southern wall, which suffered the most loss in the Roman destruction. Though we are not in complete agreement on all of her period distinctions and dating, Eilat Mazar's 2011 two-volume The Walls of the Temple Mount is an excellent source for locating the Umayyad wall reconstruction. By rebuilding all the walls, Muawiyah determined the footprint of the new Umayyad sanctuary directly over that of the Second Temple. At the same time, many pre-existent access gates of the sanctuary were rebuilt and multiple new ones added. The Herodian ones are the plain triple gate and the decorated double gate in the south. In the western wall, Warren's and Wilson gates were rebuilt, as was the Herodian bridge, providing access to Wilson's gate. The Eastern Byzantine Golden Gate was completed or renovated with added new Umayyad decor on east and west entrances and new interior columnar structure. New gates appeared in the south, north, and western walls. In the south, the plain single gate and its underground passage. In the north, two new gates, at least one triple gate. Today, they are the main central northern entrances, Bab al-Atam and Bab Hitta, and in the west, the Bab Sakina, Bab al-Silsila, and Bab al-Nazim. All display Umayyad stone construction, and I can show you the stone construction right here in the Bab al-Atam. I don't know, can you see this? Can you see my cursor? Okay.
Yeah.
Which was a triple gate at the time. All display Umayyad stone construction. Michael Burgoyne's publications best document these gates, though he disagreed with our earlier Umayyad dating. In the spring of 2016, we spent a productive week on site with Michael before his passing in 2021. Now onto the buildings. First, the mosque. The first building added to the sanctuary was the Mosque of Jerusalem, located in the southeast corner of the precinct. Previous scholarship, losing my place here, emphasized that the first mosque proposed by the Caliph Umar on arrival in Jerusalem after 636 was located south of the Rock, capital R, and did not survive, hence the blank space on most site plans. However, that mosque, first proposed by Umar and later by the Caliph Uthman, who died in 644, was built for Muawiyah, and I have added it to this particular site plan. Christian sources mention construction in the southeast corner by 639, and a year after the Caliph Uthman appointed Muawiyah governor, he ordered the building of the mosque. And that the mosque existed by 640 was situated, open quote, where once the temple arose in its magnificence, unquote, said the Gallic Bishop Arculf in 659/60. Thus was completed by 660 for Muawiyah's investiture as commander of the faithful in the mosque. The mosque remains today and is known by the misnomer Solomon's Stables in Western sources, because they did use it as a stable, and as al-Masjid al-Qadim, or the Old Mosque in Arabic, and is today the Marwani Musalla, or prayer space. It was considered an underground structure of unknown function or as part of the Herodian Stoa substructure. The first signifier that it was not Herodian was the use of Herodian stone in reuse for the large pillars forming the support structure of the building. Second, during the opening of the safety entrances to the building in 1999, we can see the arched structures. It was revealed that there was a series of 9 arched openings defining a northern entrance, determining that it was not underground, but buried. And I can show you the 9 arched structure in, and I've quoted Arkulf here in complete on the slide. And with Isam's drawing of the 9 arched openings, there was a retaining wall built on the inside and they couldn't be seen. So they didn't know if it was buried. Slide 15. It was revealed that there was a series of 9 arched openings at that north entrance. Okay, so the arched stonework matches exactly the early Umayyad stonework of the Triple Gate and other previously described Umayyad gates of the precinct. Thus, the building is an early Umayyad building with a large northern main entrance from the interior of the precinct. Thus, the early 7th century level of the precinct's east side, of this whole area over here, was at the level of this northern entrance. As I stood by that northern entrance with Isam in 2012, he asked what I thought the implications were of this newly discovered buried building and its placement much lower in the precinct. I turned to the north to see that the level of the Golden Gate was the same, suggesting that the entire east side was at that level in the 7th century. Thus, all the area between the Golden Gate and the northern entrance to the building was later filled in with debris. The debris sifted by the Israeli archaeologist Gabriel Barkai and Zaki Dvira's Temple Mount Sifting Project, with whom I've been working since 2009. The Golden Gate, used by Byzantine ruler Heraclius returning the relic of the True Cross to Jerusalem in 631, was the mosque's formal ceremonial entrance leading through the lower area of the eastern precinct to the north entrance. That whole area that's delineated in green, I'm calling the san, or the courtyard of the mosque. The new single gate in the south wall allowed the ruler private access from his palace, situated just outside the precinct wall, with the underground passageway providing him safe passage out of the mosque. In the south end of the 5th aisle of the 9-aisled mosque, there are distinct markers of stone forming a flat arch indicating the direction of the Qibla, or wall facing Mecca. From textual evidence, it's known that Muawiyah invented the mihrab using stone markers for the direction of prayer toward Mecca, or stones representing prayer places of the Prophet, all prior to the use of a niche indicating prayer direction. One of the stones on the top of the left image, forming the rudimentary arch or mihrab, was a surviving piece of spolia or ruin from the decoration of the Second Temple period, Triple Gate. Thus, a conscious use of Temple period material. This tradition derives from the incorporation of ritual stones of pre-Islamic worship and survive in the Great Mosque of Sana'a, built in 630 in South Arabia, Yemen today, serving as part of the mosque's original mihrab and then defined as a sanctuary space for the ruler. Thus, Muawiyah's investiture as Umayyad sovereign is a religious space consciously linking religion with the temple and statehood in Jerusalem. What remains of the Umayyad period is at the level of the pier structure of reused Herodian stones, and the area of the south precinct wall, the lower area of the single gate, and the entire triple gate. The building went out of use possibly after its desecration as stables by the Crusaders, or after the construction, at least after the construction of the 8th century Aqsa Mosque, which remains today the Congregational Mosque of Jerusalem. The old mosque today is used as a prayer space or musalla, distinct from the mosque. We published an article on the mosque in 2013 in the Jerusalem Quarterly entitled "The Marwani Musalla in Jerusalem, New Findings," and is dealt with in more detail in our book. Entering the sanctuary from the south through the triple gate in the south wall, Muslims turn to the right through this entrance to enter the mosque to pray. A parallel exists in Muawiyah's prayer space in what is now the Great Mosque of Damascus. One entered through the triple gate. Let's see, am I on the right slide? Yes. One entered through the triple gate of the ancient temenos, right here, with Muslims turning to the right to pray in the open space facing the mihrab, which is here, in the south Qibla wall. Christians went to the left to the Church of St. John the Baptist within the confines of the same space. Thus a shared but separate religious space within a sanctuary. In Jerusalem, the rebuilt passages with typical Umayyad large stone vault construction is similar to that of the rebuilt bridge on the west side and led from the triple gate to the interior of the sanctuary, much as it does today. The bridge being the image on the right in that dark lit space, which doesn't allow for good photography. This allowed other religious practitioners to enter the sanctuary much in the same way as Damascus. This, along with the formal precinct entrance of the Golden Gate, allowed access to the more elevated area topographically of the precinct. Okay. New buildings, again. Now we're going to talk about the mawazin, called scales, or the arcades. At the time, the upper area, now encased by the upper platform around the Holy Rock, was truly almost flat. And we can see that in this area right here. Distinguishing a new sacrosanct area there were at least 3, if not 4, mawazin, literally scales, whereby, open quote, we shall set up the scales of justice for the day of judgment so that not a soul will be dealt with unjustly, unquote. And that is a quote from the Quran. The use of this term designates the area beyond the scales, and subsequently the new buildings in that area have an eschatological significance, notably relating to the end of days, significant to all the religions of the book who were allowed access to the site during this period, all of which changed during the reign of Abd al-Malik. The original piers of the south central, west central, and east scales remain intact today. And I'm showing you the eastern one during the 1930s restoration of the site by the British, and are of the same Herodian stone found in the mosque interior, that type of stone used only in the early Umayyad period. They all stood independent of the platform with no stairs. The arcade section between the piers of the west central one are later modifications, because they are attached to the platform. These freestanding passageways led gently up to the most sacrosanct area of the precinct. Once there, the visitor encountered at least 2 new buildings, the Dome of the Chain and the Dome of the Rock. While today these buildings are contained and seemingly supported by an expansive upper platform, our research contends it did not exist until the Abbasid period in the 10th century. Evidence for this is in an inscription atop the north column of the western mizan, or scale, and you can see that I've marked inscription here, dated 951-952, indicating that this scale was there earlier and then was restored at that time, adding the arch section as it is now attached to the platform to an earlier Umayyad structure. As to the later platform expansion, it was first expanded to the west and to the south during the Ayyubid 13th century, dated by inscriptions, and later to the east and the north, probably to cover the ruins of earlier Crusader structures destroyed by Ayyubid conquest. Since the terrain sloped gradually up to the rock, providing a natural near flat area for construction, there was no need for a platform in the Umayyad period. And I'm showing you a plan that shows, we're generating a new graphic for this. At the time, we still thought there were stairs at the early platform, but they were put in and it's not there. So just disregard the stairs in this plan. Supporting evidence exists in the fact that the actual Umayyad stone construction of the exterior walls of the octagonal part of the Dome of the Rock extends below the platform consistently by 0.9 to 1 meter and sits directly on the bedrock below. And I think you can see the original stone construction here on one of the facades of the Dome of the Rock. These are taken from the 1960s renovation documents. Similarly, on the interior of the dome, the column bases and piers all sit on large stones firmly placed on the bedrock, almost a meter below the current floor. There's also evidence of an earlier stone pavement at about 0.6 meters below the current floor, which must have been the original level of the floor of the Dome of the Rock. The current floor dates from the later Mamluk period, perhaps raised while the platform was expanded to the north and redone between 1294 and 1326, all dated by inscriptions over more than 30 years, suggesting a major project at the time. All of these new things were revealed in the 1960s renovation project records with supporting photographic evidence. The Dome of the Chain was also examined in that 1960s period, revealing that it also once sat directly on the bedrock below. Confirming that this was the case are texts cited by Isam Awwad that the Dome of the Chain was built on the edge of the rock, Fawq al-Sakra in Arabic. If one examines the topography of the building, it actually does sit on the edge of the rock before it slopes slightly down toward the east. Right here, right on the edge of the rock. Okay, now on to the Dome of the Rock and the Dome of the Chain. Thus, we have two new buildings sitting in the mostly flat area around the rock. We know from a Christian text of the 1660 visit of the monk Anastasius of Sinai that the central area debris was being cleared by, quote, demons preparing for construction. So these two structures were built after Muawiyah became commander of the faithful in his mosque in 660. Thus, we can safely state that the construction of the Dome of the Chain and the Dome of the Rock began after that date, and that the Dome of the Chain was completed before his death, and that the Dome of the Rock was completed up to at least the level of the dome by the time of his death in 680. Dome of the Rock, or the Qubat al-Sahra, as it was called, was no doubt under construction at the order of Muawiyah. And it was completed, it was left to be finished by the new Caliph Abd al-Malik, who reigned between 685 and 705. The 691-92 inscription on the interior of the Dome of the Rock indicates that someone built the dome, and I will indicate small d, not capital, at that time, not the entire building. Abbasid ruler al-Ma'mun, who ruled between 828 and 838, replaced the name in the inscription with his own, suggesting that he made repairs to the dome at that time. There are also inscriptions on multiple dome rafters from the Abbasid period that survived to document repairs to the dome at that time. Okay, back to the topic. We know not for certain, but only through logic, that the name replaced was Abd al-Malik, suggesting that he later completed the project begun by his predecessor, a pattern which was very clear in his earlier monumental history in Greater Syria. Actually, I should show you. You can see where in the 1960s image here, you can see where the name was excised. You can see it here, but not as clearly. And Ma'mun's name was put in. As many have noted, the form of the Dome of the Rock is like many regional Byzantine churches, a domed octagonal commemorative building with ambulatories surrounding the rock, here compared to the 6th century church in Caesarea, situated on a Herodian platform. Like its Byzantine octagonal centrally planned counterparts, its function was commemorative and not spatially designated for congregational prayer. Both exterior and interior were covered by mosaics with marble paneling on the octagonal base. Exterior ones replaced with tiles in the 16th century. And I have to add, these tiles date from the 1960s. What has never seriously been questioned up to now are the features of the building that are not the same as local churches. No local church has 4 entrances to the cardinal points, nor was any church colorfully decorated with exterior mosaics. Remnants of exterior mosaics in situ surviving in images from the 1960s, which you can see on the slide, and in fragments in the on-site Islamic Museum. We must look elsewhere for the source of these features. Some have noted that the exterior parallels the colorful exterior of the Jewish temple, and this is a valid reference, but the temple was not an octagonal building. However, the exterior of the 6th century church of Sana'a in Yemen, which is just north of the mosque, was covered with mosaics, and those were removed circa 680 and placed in the Kaaba in Mecca, so were very important to the Umayyads. Also, mosaics covered the exterior of Persian Sasanian palaces, notably the palace of the capital at Ctesiphon, with only fragments surviving, which you can see on the screen. But they display similar techniques and quality to those of the dome. Ctesiphon was captured by Muslim forces in 637, so at the same time of the conquest of Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock mosaics are far superior to those of many local Byzantine churches, warranting a possible attribution of these to Persian craftsmen rather than local Christians. One can speculate that the artisanry of the 2 major conquered empires, Byzantine and Sasanian, are featured prominently in both the form and decor of the dome. However, descriptions of another building type address parallels in form and entry from the cardinal points. These features are found in the pre-Islamic Sabian palaces of South Arabia, Yemen today, a region previously under Sasanian Persia, and early on brought under Muslim control. These palaces were called mihrabs, defined as sanctuary spaces reserved for rulers, as distinct from stones orienting the direction of prayer. Texts provide important substantiating information. One 7th century source relates that the prophet in 630 commanded his converted Persian governor to attach to his new mosque in Sana'a to the ruins of the Sabian Gumdan palace, linking the new religion and rule to the sovereign legacy of the pre-Islamic kings. The palace exists only in legendary descriptions as a domed polygonal building with a colorful exterior and 4 entrances from the cardinal points. 7th century Yemeni historian Kabal Akbar informed Muawiyah that he, as the first Umayyad sovereign, inherited the legacy of the pre-Islamic kings. And in fact, this historian resided in the court of Muawiyah. Linkage with the religious space of the mosque left the path open in defining the Dome of the Rock as a royal mihrab sanctuary located just northeast of his mosque. The Quran discusses mihrabs as sanctuary space within the temple in Jerusalem, that of David, Solomon's, multiple maharib, and that of Mary, who lived for 12 years in a mihrab in the temple. Thus, the Quran connects the religions of the book in the mihrab royal sanctuary of the Dome of the Rock. Oleg Grabar, my PhD advisor at Harvard, successfully, in my estimation, signified that the regal paraphernalia displayed in the mosaics of the octagon, but not those of the drum, represented the Byzantine and Sasanian empires subject to the Umayyad Muslim sovereignty. Now, in our last building, the Dome of the Chain, or the Kubat al-Silsila. Is this the one I want? Nope, that's the one I want. The dome of the chain, or the Kubata Silsila, is a small 11-sided domed structure consisting of two concentric open arcades using columns that predate the structure for support of the building, sitting at the edge of the rock and way too close to the Dome of the Rock's east entrance. You can see the original Umayyad stonework paralleling that of the other Umayyad monuments. Like the dome, the original glass mosaic exterior decor was replaced by tile in the 16th century, seen in the Ottoman inscriptions seen here above the later mihrab, dating from after the Ayyubids. There was one during the Ayyubid period, but this one replaced it. The narrower 11th side suggests that this space was always intended to contain some sort of niche, but perhaps serving a different purpose. The meaning and functions previously assigned to the small building includes its Muslim eschatological relationship to distributing Solomonic or Davidian justice with a chain of gold or light tethered to the heavens during the rule of David, removed from him to return to at the end of days, passing that authority to the Umayyads. It is also proposed as the possible site of the taking of the oath of caliphal authority, or the bayah in Arabic, and it was used as such later, and also as a prayer space, a later Umayyad function, also as the place for the dispensation of royal funds as a treasury, and as the location of the Omphalos, or the center of the world, not necessarily substantiated well in text. I'd like to propose a new interpretation of the meaning and function of the building today. Muawiyah, consulting with 7th century Yemeni scholars, was interested in the throne, or arsh, of Solomon and his ability to harness the powers of spiritual beings, or jinn, in the construction of buildings. Also tied to Solomon is the throne of the Queen of Sheba, or Saba, or Bilqis, in the Yemeni kingdom of the Sabians, connecting thus the Sabians to Solomon and Jerusalem. Additionally, the legendary Sasanian Persian king Jamshid had the same powers as Solomon, thus uniting the Byzantine and Sasanian realms in this building. Might there also be a reference from Muawiyah as the first to ascend the Umayyad throne to the historic first Muslim expansion into Sasanian territory at the 633 Battle of the Chains, Silsila, Salasil in the plural, in present-day Kuwait. Ties also exist to the Sasanian concept of divine kingship, though not of divine ruler. The Sasanian capital city of Ctesiphon was captured in 637, at the same time as Jerusalem. Sasanian royal regalia included suspending the heavy royal crown from a chain over the enthroned ruler's head. That crown was sent to Jerusalem, and according to one tradition, it hung in the Dome of the Rock during Abd al-Malik's reign. But where was it before that? Was it possibly utilized earlier by Muawiyah? We do know from Eddinghausen, Grabar, and Suchek's research that a symbolic crown hung from a stone chain over the enthroned ruler in a niche in the 8th century Umayyad complex of Hirbat al-Mafjar, or Hisham's palace in Jericho. That chain currently lives in the Rockefeller Museum. Was the Dome of the Chain in Jerusalem the precedent for that usage in Jericho, serving as a royal throne room? So was the crown of the conquered Sasanians from Ctesiphon suspended above Muawiyah's head, signifying his inheritance of divine kingship from the Sasanians? And was he invested with the return of Davidic powers to the Umayyads to administer justice? And did he sit in his role as arbiter of justice in this sacrosanct space enclosed by the scales of justice at the end of days? And inheriting the Solomonic powers of building construction from this vantage point, he could also easily supervise the construction of the Dome of the Rock, the diadem in the crown of Muawiyah's vision for Jerusalem as his capital. What I didn't deal with today is the structures, the palatial structures south of the Haram, and that will be dealt with in the book. And I thank you very much for listening today. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Beatrice. So we now have an opportunity for you to catch your breath and for people to ask questions, either in the chat or by raising your hand if you wish to speak.
Okay.
Okay, we have a very long.
I have to
David
activate that. Hang on. Whoa.
Do you want me to read it out or?
I'm reading it right now.
Okay.
I have cited all of these sources in the book. I did not feel it was necessary to elaborate on a huge list of these sources. And yes, I actually had a conversation with Larry Neese at a talk I gave at the University of Pennsylvania. Well, I think that history of Muawiyah is currently being rewritten, David, by many scholars, I including in my JIA article on Muawiyah's history, with all the sources cited there. Yes, and well, Adamnan or Arkulf, as cited in the inscription on the front of that I showed earlier, is there. No, well, the inscription, that the text by Arkulf Adamnan was redated by David Woods at the University of Cork, and he did reach out with me, sending me his article on that, and he redated that text to 660, right after the 659 earthquake, and he attributes the wooden pieces and bits and slabs to restoration material that was being used to accommodate the mosque and for the 660 restoration of the building. And in fact, there is a remnant, and I glossed over all of this in this talk, which encompassed the whole project. In the ninth aisle, there are remnants of an earlier arch that survives. And David, you and I think Shimon Gibson documented that in your publication. And I now have excellent pictures of it. And if one projects from the surviving arch springing that sits there, I would say that that was perhaps Umayyad period. And I go through a long argument about this in the book, where it produced a flat-like arch that appears in similarly to the arched vaulting of the triple gate and the bridge, the Umayyad bridge that was rebuilt in the same time period. So I think that kind of it fills in the gaps, and it's part of a long chapter on the mosque.
Thank you, Beatrice.
David. Hi,
David Goravich. Shall I read it out so everyone can hear it in case they don't see the
yeah,
chat?
Go ahead.
Sorry, Beatrice, thank you. This is David Goravich. It's a very interesting paper. Is it published? If so, please could you give the bibliographic reference? And a question, you mentioned that you can see Umayyad masonry at the triple gate. What are the methods to identify such building style?
It's the form of the arches, and I think that it's actually Michael Burgoyne who really in multiple articles, and I think it's also in Umayyad Jerusalem, goes into the detailed descriptions of those arches, and I fully discuss that whole arch configuration as it appears under the Nahawiyya madrasa in the south corner. And you can contact me, David, and we can talk more about this at length. I think you might find it interesting. It's the arch structure sitting on these trapezoidal stones, and they show up everywhere in the Umayyad construction of the arches of the structure in the 7th century. I don't know if that answers your question. And no, it isn't published. I'm actually thinking of organizing this material for Anne Killebrew's journal. She's looking for another article from me. So I think I will, it's written in sufficient length, I think, that I could publish it as a short article summarizing the book before it comes out. But feel free to contact me, David. I think you still have my email address. Yeah.
Thank you, Beatrice. So Gregory Bellotto, good evening. Can you please comment on any Fatimid architectural additions and gifts provided at the Dome of the Rock? Any other Fatimid sources aside from the Book of Gifts and Rarities and Nasir Khusraw?
Well, there was the Fatimid construction of the southeast Mizan or arcade. That was certainly a Fatimid construction. There was a lot of Fatimid reconstruction. The dome was reconstructed in the Fatimid period because it collapsed in an earthquake. I mean, there's a lengthy evaluation of this in the sources and, scholarly sources. It's not one I focused on. I refer to Fatimid reconstructions when they're relevant. And in the chapter on the arcades and platform, I go more into detail with this. And that arcade was restored in the Ayyubid period. A lot of reconstruction was done. There were also arcades along the west and north walls that were built in the Fatimid period. And I know that Michael Burgoyne deals with all of that. And there are gifts that live in the Islamic Museum. I can't remember which, or I haven't looked at that material for ages. I know there are Qurans that live in the museum. Unfortunately, the museum isn't accessible to most visitors these days, but I was able to gain access and worked in the museum for over a year on the tiles, the surviving tiles. I don't know if that helps. Does that answer your question, Gregory?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm sure I missed some.
Thank you. Sorry, may I just ask for the source? Thank you. I was just going to ask if you knew of any primary sources, original sources,
For the Fatimid,
aside from the scholarly work. Do you
No.
know of any other?
well, no, I mean, you have Nasiri Khusraw certainly documents this time period. And that text has been quite extensively explored. And actually, it's difficult for me to separate the more eschatological associations with the site from Nasiri Khusraw's description, which is one of the major sources for it. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
And we have a question from Mehmet Khan, and I can't see the second name, I'm afraid. It's cut off on my text, but thank you. You mentioned that the dome began to be built under Muawiyah's reign. Any indication when exactly the construction began, and why do we think it is Muawiyah, not Abd al-Malik, who began the construction of the Dome of the Rock?
Well, there are multiple reasons, but there have been attributions to Muawiyah before. In fact, Berbar and Goitin both attributed the construction to Muawiyah for a time period reason, and yet there's a long page of explanation in the book. For multiple reasons. One of the reasons for the time it took, number two, that Muawiyah was the builder. He was a builder of monuments all over Bilad al-Sham before he even arrived in Jerusalem. Abd al-Malik lived in Medina until he moved in 683 to Damascus, and he became Caliph in 685, which was a huge period of warfare. He was not a builder. And in fact, we have so much documentable evidence at places such as the Muawiyah's palace at Sinabra, which was added to by Muawiyah, by Abd al-Malik. The monuments built in Caesarea added to by Abd al-Malik. And my article in JIA does address all of those issues at length, actually, in a 34-page article. So I would refer you to that. But I suggested in the talk today that the building of the dome began in 660, right after he became Amir al-Mu'minin. He never did use the title of Caliph. It was not one he chose to use because it didn't go with his premise of unifying the three religions of the book. The area was being cleared, and we know that from a Christian text, that Syrian monk who visited the site in 660 and saw it being cleared by demons, and it was the central part that was specifically mentioned. This source is cited everywhere, including by Jeremy Jones and everybody else, about the clearance of the site. I think that I don't know, does that help? Does that answer? I don't see you on the screen. Where are you? No.
He said, okay, thank you.
Oh, okay, I see that, yes.
Yeah, Akpina.
So Turkish.
Yes. So Jonathan Turner has a question. What was the reason for the change of policy from allowing all monotheists to worship?
Well, that was Abd al-Malik that did this. He codified Islam by limiting access. He codified the primacy of Islam on the site. He allowed Jewish workers on the site, and that's well documented in Julian Raby's article in one of the volumes published in the Oxford series. And it did change with Muawiyah's disappearance. I think it was the beginning of the isolation. Another reason, and I'm addressing this in the introduction to the book, in the formation of empire, and I think this is the broader argument, one has to think about bringing in as many people as you can to the new religion, and you extend yourself to all of the peoples of the region. And I think that started in Arabia with the inception of Islam, with the need to bring the tribes in. And Muawiyah's main goal was to bring all of the tribes in. He married 2 Christian women from the Arab tribe in Balad Sham, just outside of Damascus, based in the Ghassanids. And there are parallels in Turkey. I just gave a talk in Istanbul on my city of Bursa and its religious monuments. And I was delving into the formation of the Ottoman Empire. And indeed, the same exact thing. There's a broad outreach to a greater population at the beginning of empire. And then there's a certain codification that takes place. This will all be more clearly elucidated in the introduction of the book. I think this is not necessarily limited, and I think it's very visible in the monuments. And I did just complete an article on the use of spolia in the 7th century monuments, which I didn't really address in this talk today, except for the brief mention of the spolia used in the mihrab. But I examined, and this article will come out in the next issue of Jerusalem Quarterly, and how the spolia are used in the Dome of the Rock, which is inclusive of spolia from the Christian and the Temple periods, and in the spolia used in the Dome of the Chain, that sort of broadcasts this message of inclusion. I mean, there's a giant fragment from a screen from a Byzantine church in the northeast face of the Dome of the Rock. It's at the base, and it projects down below, obviously, the current platform, but it's there in its entirety. And I remember somebody commenting to me that this was an abasement of this. And I said, absolutely not. It's putting it on display. It's a very conscious reuse and put there for purposes. And I kind of address it as the beginning of the museum, the idea of a museum in the Islamic world. And it starts in the 7th century. And the same thing was going on in 14th century Turkey, in the use of spolia from earlier periods, showing connections. And I show this in the city of Bursa and the Green Mosque, and it shows up in the Hudavendigar Mosque in the same city. But there are Turkish scholars whose names are right out of my head at the moment, who address this same issue of the unification and the use of spolia from previous empires in a very conscious and projected way as a display. Does that answer? Yeah, I've answered it. Okay.
Yes, thank you. So a comment from Isam Awwad: I've always wondered why there was such a long gap between the Muslim conquest of Jerusalem and the construction of the Dome of the Rock. You have answered that.
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, when you say that the crown came from Ctesiphon in 637, and after 705 sat in the Dome of the Rock, where was it? Where did it live before that? It obviously had significance, and that's sort of why I pushed it to be part of the royal trappings of Muawiyah. It's, you know, when the Abbasids wrote the Umayyads out of history, and the first article that I really encountered that really challenged this was George Miles' article on the 1948 article on the dams that Muawiyah built in Arabia. And he did build 2 huge dams in Saudi Arabia before he moved in the process of becoming part of the new empire. One was built before, and I think they were both built after he became Amir al-Mu'mineen. And all of this is discussed in that article in JIA, which is published out of Sheffield. The book is being published out of Sheffield as well at Equinox Press for people who will be looking for it. Did I? Yeah, okay.
Can I ask a question then? You've been working on this project for 30 years. You're about to publish this big book with your late co-author. Do you have any remaining questions, or what are the next big questions around this really important area?
Well, there's lots of questions that that can't be answered at the moment. I've managed to find a lot of them in a circumspect way. I mean, when the surviving evidence of somebody's reign is purposely eradicated, one has to be more creative in the use of materials. I think that Hagerism, which actually questioned any use of the early Islamic sources, really put a stopgap in the progress of research. That has since been rectified to some extent, but I think a lot of that still remains to be fixed in the realm of scholarship. And the reason that much of this still hasn't been published by us is because we've been working underground for years to make sure we ascertained we could keep access to the site. But now, as announced in my lecture, my memorial lecture for Isam in 2019, we've come out from under the rocks of research to announce our findings.
Yes, thank you. There's a technical question which you don't have to answer, but I do. Where can I watch the recorded lecture of today, Shadi? If you're a member, you can, well, actually, Anthony, I think you, or Sheila, you could answer this better than I could. You're on mute, Anthony.
We post our lectures on our website. There's a 1 to 2 week gap between the lecture normally and when we post, and so then it's available to members only for a period of time, and then after that to the general public. So you can expect it on our website in about 2 weeks' time if you're a member, a little later if you're not.
Thank you very much, Anthony. William Rains, you have a question.
Thank you very much for that. I was just thinking about the coinage which was issued in the reign of Muawiyah. The base metal coinage, specifically the bilingual ones, continue very much to use Christian symbols and the like. That's not so true of the gold issues. But I mean, do you see that as part of Muawiyah's intended inclusive agenda? Or do you see it as simply the conservatism of people wanting coins that always looked like what they had in the past?
No, I see it as a conscious maintenance, and I think Clive Foss has dealt with that quite effectively. I do know that the coinage has been used to deny the existence of statehood in the period of Muawiyah and attributing it to al-Malik because of this. And it is Clive Foss who does address the issues, who's a Byzantinist, who does address these issues of there being the signs of statehood. And that I do address in the article, the JIA article, the Journal of Islamic Archaeology article. I think you can, I don't know if it's available online. If not, write to me and I can send you a copy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any further questions? So, and Rachel Sparks has who's one of our members and committee members has given a very useful piece of information in the chat about how you can access the lectures as well. Thank you, Rachel. So it remains for me to thank you on behalf of our committee, Beatrice, and also of all those who are attending today. It's been hugely enriching to hear, and it's not so often that we hear the results of 30 years of research coming out from underground into the open air. We look forward hugely to the volume for next year in 2023 on capitalizing Jerusalem. You've spoken with enormous clarity over incredibly complex and difficult subject with beautiful illustrations. It's a great privilege to have an art historian speak to us and one who's been working on this project. So thank you very, very much indeed from us all, and a very good day to you in Boston for the rest of the day.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.